what's going on, y'all? It's your girl, Mary B. Welcome back to another episode of Something's Gotta Give. And today's episode is about job stability. And little Mary doesn't know a thing about being stable within a job. And why would she? Because there was never an example set in front of her of what being an employee is like, or even just having a healthy relationship with your job, your career, or money, period. So when I was super young and I was growing up with my birth mother, she was not able to maintain a job whatsoever. We relied heavily on government assistance to just get by. And whenever she did have a job, it usually came from her running to the convention center, asking for a last minute job and getting one. But when she got one, the pay was only minimum wage. So we never really got far in life. Money was not something she knew how to get, and it was not something she knew how to maintain. And I know that is a big reason as to why she always went back to my father, because my dad was the only form of stability she knew. In my mom's world, she could not get to a level of just being able to survive without a man. So she would pull on my dad's heartstrings with toying me, saying like, hey, if you take care of us, you will be allowed to see your daughter, which is obviously unfair, but that's what I learned from my mom and her relationship with money and stability and work. Now, with my father, whenever he was back in the picture, he always had a different job. And so, yes, he was somebody who did have more money. He was never stable within a job. I never knew what job he was working at the time. I just knew he did have something, and it usually was in the field of maintenance, plumbing, etc. But again, it wasn't something consistent. Now, with my adoptive mother, she worked a plethora of jobs. She was never around because she was always working between 2 to 3 jobs. And those jobs that she worked always rotated. So not only was she working too much, but she was rotating the jobs that she was in. And those were primarily my caretakers, right? And even the family members that were tied to my parents didn't have such a great example to learn from when it came to sustaining a job. And so when it comes time of me becoming an adult, I am kind of lost in the sauce because I don't really know what working looks like. I don't know how to go after a career field. I don't really know too much about thinking about the future and thinking about work in a way of like sustaining yourself and building a life of your dreams. I attach work to survival because it's the only example that I've known, and I was doing that subconsciously. So obviously I have very big dreams, but because all of the examples I've had, none of them were even talking about making dreams a reality. I never even heard my parents share what their dreams were, so they were people who just worked to survive. So I ended up following that same exact example, and I ended up doing work that they were doing around this time of age. So my adoptive mom waitressed at Ruby Tuesday for years. My father spent years working in the restaurant in all different positions, whether he was a manager, a chef, a waiter. My stepmother encouraged me to get into waitressing because when she was my age, it was the most lucrative job she had. And my mother obviously worked in the kitchen as well. So lo and behold, what do I become? A waitress. And I've been a waitress and I've been in the food industry for the entirety of my 20s. And I've never been able to be an ideal employee within these jobs. And the main reason for me was my social life, my habits of partying always interfered within my job. So this pattern started with the last job I held in Boston before I moved to Los Angeles. It's my first waitressing job in the city, and I've never been exposed to this culture. And all of my coworkers are introducing me to drinking on the job because I always ended up being the server who closed. I was there very late. I would get off basically every shift between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m. And around that time is when everybody's drinking. They're hiding their drinks, they're asking the bartenders for shots. The bartenders are taking shots with you. You have your customers offering to buy you drinks. And who am I to say no? Back then, it was all fun and games. I think I was like, 23, 24, just living the dream. And I was slowly climbing the ranks as a server who could perform very well. And you had to be like a top ranked server to work a private party, because these private parties would have very large budgets. And even with their minimum, the spending was ginormous. And it was 3 weeks before my move out date to come out to Los Angeles, and I'm working my first private party. And by then, my drinking habits were known within the company. I am even surprising myself with how much I was drinking. I never reached that type of level with drinking, especially at work, but I'm seeing my peers doing it. So why would I think that it's not acceptable? Well, obviously, I'm working. Of course it's not acceptable, but being the people pleaser I was back then, I just wanted to fit in, and drinking also used to feel really good. So I'm drinking, and as I'm working this private party, my fellow coworkers who have had experience working these private parties, they're encouraging me slash bullying me into ordering them drinks because their budget is so high, and they're not even going to realize, and trust me, I get away with it all the time. So of course, I'm allowing them to use my number, and I'm allowing them to order drinks, but I'm also I'm not going to let them have all the fun. I deserve to have fun too. So I end up ordering shots for me, and I'm thinking I'm being slick and going to a specific area to hide my drinks and thinking I'll just drink them when I have the time to. And I had built a negative repertoire with a woman who was dating essentially one of the general managers there. And of course, she seen me when I was trying to be slick and told her boyfriend, who then fired me on the spot. And I was like, there's no way this is happening. I'm working to save up money that I'm gonna need to survive when I come to Los Angeles. But that was the first time where I got fired. And I'm also shocked because know that I'm better than this. I know I'm a good employee. That's why I'm able to work these private parties. But my association with partying became a problem within me working in the service industry. That was the first time it happened. Now, fast forward, I'm living in Los Angeles. I'm working this job. I'm a waitress and a bartender at this job. And I begin the pattern again of drinking on the job and becoming overly social and allowing my customers to buy me drinks, and I'm drinking with my peers after work. And I often was able to get away with inexcusable behavior at this particular restaurant because it was family owned, and luckily enough, I did have a good relationship with managers who were able to just kind of let me get away with things or save me if the owners were like, yo, what's going on with Mary? But eventually there was new management that came into the picture, and my list of negatives with him were getting pretty long, and a lot of them had to do with alcohol consumption or just me getting into trouble bartending, whether it be me giving out free drinks or giving drinks to my coworkers or me actively drinking on the job, So even though my last straw that got me fired from that job was not directly correlated to drinking, they had a long list already that had many of the reasons to do with alcohol consumption and working. So I ended up getting fired from there, and I'm like, at this point, like, is this a pattern for me? Am I someone that like can't sustain a job? And subconsciously, like, I'm just being like my mother, getting fired from a job and just going out there looking for a new job, because I learned from her that there are a plethora of jobs out there, and from my father too. Like, if you get fired from one or you don't want to work one anymore, you can just always go out and get another one. But that's in the mindset of thinking small and just living to survive, right? You're just working paycheck to paycheck to be able to maintain a life, instead of looking at it from a perspective where money can be made in a way not only to survive, but I can thrive and I can build generational wealth. That is not something that I was introduced to. Rather, I was introduced to, you can just go up the street, apply to all these jobs, and somebody's going to call you back and you're going to get hired, but you're only going to be making minimum wage and you're going to be working really hard. I associated with working has to be hard. If I'm not busting my butt for $1, then there's no way I can be making money. I was never introduced to the different type of way of working smarter and having access to using your brain and your intelligence to have money coming to you lucratively in that manner. So I'm thinking maybe this is just how my life is going to be, right? Because what happens in your childhood is essentially what happens to you in your adulthood, until you choose to wake up and recognize patterns and choose to rewrite your story. And so now I'm back on the hunt again, and I'm looking for another waitressing and bartending job. Now I'm so deep in this field that it's become very comfortable for me, and I'm in a position where I can't take a pay cut and start at a job where I'm not making as much money, but I can pour my energy and time to climb the ladder and eventually make more money, right? And I also don't have a resume that many people will take serious. Unfortunately, when you're in the what's it called, service industry, people kind of look down on you. Your experience is not valid, essentially, is the scenarios that I've run into. So I'm just finding myself to be stuck in this field that I had no desire to grow in. You know, I went to school for broadcast journalism. I wanted to podcast. I wanted to be a public speaker, but I found myself working in the examples that was shown to me growing up. So now I attain a job bartending at yet another restaurant. And when I start this job, I have a conversation with myself and I try convincing myself that this time will be different. I will make sure that I don't build a repertoire of drinking with my peers. I'm not going to party with them. I'm not going to make friends. I'm not going to drink on the job. But habits die hard, right? So I went back to being the same person I was, but I'm just in a new space. But it's familiar because it's essentially the same job. I'm just in a new building. So what ends up happening is I do make friends and I do become socializing with them, and I end up going to the dive bars with them, and that leads to me being comfortable at work, and I'm making friends with my coworkers, and I'm getting my friends hired at this job. And so eventually everybody starts drinking on the job. So this is yet another job where we're all just drunken fools and we're all enabling each other within this activity, and we're all partaking in substance abuse. Whether my peers realize it or not, like, we were abusing this substance. And I found myself twice being suspended and under investigation because of my behaviors while being under the influence. And I never got fired, but I did take the liberty upon myself to finally be honest and notice that this is a pattern and we got to break the pattern, right? So I left that job and I found a new job in the same industry, but I came as a new person. And so within this new job, I quit bartending. So I'm not allowed to be around alcohol, which helped with the process of becoming sober because I don't have access to this substance that has become my addiction, that that is the direct reason as to why I'm unable to maintain a job. And I also finally stuck to the words of, I'm going to create healthy boundaries within my coworkers. I'm going to present myself as the new person because I can do that, because they do not know who I am. So therefore, I don't need to bring old Mary into this new future. Old Mary can stay where she is. I want to learn how to be stable. I want to learn how to just go to work and not be frightened of being able to not be frightened about the person that I was the night before, and to not know how I acted the night before, and to not know if I'm going to have my job the next day or not. That was something that I felt for years with all the serving jobs that I had, but not the most current one, because I've been the best version of myself. And reflecting on that, I realized, oh, of course alcohol was the reason primarily as to why I wasn't able to sustain a job. But I got really comfortable with the notion of I can just bounce around and I can just make minimum wage and I can just work to survive and I can bust my butt and just have this be my life, because that's what the examples I grew up with are. And teaching myself differently and rewriting my story, not only have I been able to be the most ideal employee I've always known I could be, but now I can carry that out, and I'm able to actually have a healthy relationship with my job. And it feels really good to be at peace and know that, girl, you're safe. Now I finally feel like I've reached a level where I'm not just trying to survive, and I'm not inflicting harm on myself to get to a place of being poor and to fear survival, because that's what little Mary knew. And maybe sometimes I would put my job on the line because I was searching for scarcity. I was searching for homelessness, and I was searching for evictions. I was searching for all this pain, but because that's what I grew up with. So subconsciously, I was trying to recreate that reality, right? Because life is a cycle. But I'm no longer choosing that cycle. I'm actively no longer choosing that cycle. And I understand why I was so unstable and why I chose to be so small, because my subconscious was ruling my reality. Until I brought my shadow into the light, I was able to see, oh, that's what's going on, right? And not only am I able to have sustainability and to show up as an amazing employee to my job and to my managers and to my owners, I now am taking the opportunity to teach myself that, hey, there are other ways to make money rather than going to somebody else and waiting for them to give that to you. I have the power to be an entrepreneur. I have a best friend and I have peers who have been able to make a career off of being creative, have been able to make a career off of taking the leap and doing something that's not conventional, but has been extremely lucrative for them, and then been able to not only survive, but to thrive within their jobs and be happy in their careers and figure out ways that they're going to create generational wealth beyond them and be in positions where they can help their family members. I love that I've been exposed to a different way of life. And not only have I been exposed to it, but I'm going to take advantage that not everything happens. I mean, everything happens for a reason and nothing is of a coincidence, right? So now I not only have seen that, but I get to learn from them and implement it into my own life, which is what has finally led me to trusting that I have this gift and my testimony is my power, and I'm called to share my story on this very podcast. And podcasting can be a way of changing my life, right? I shared that I went to school and I wanted to be a public speaker, and I always had a creative part of me, but little me never was poured into in a way where I believed that I could make this a career. But now I'm making space for myself and allowing all truths to be true. I get to choose what reality is true for me, right? We all have a decision to choose to live within a life, and you have to really believe that that life is possible. So here I am now living in this truth and choosing that I do have a gift and I can live off of this, and people do want to hear me, and people do think that I am making an impact simply because I'm sharing my story. And I feel like sharing your story is so powerful because I know I'm not the only one that grew up poor, and I know I'm not the only one who had parents who were able to sustain themselves, to sustain a life out of just survival, right? So within knowing all that, I can choose differently, and I can choose to have a life of sustainability. When you grow up not stable, you end up choosing a life of havoc and instability. And if you are someone who is slowly realizing, why is everything so chaotic? It's your inner child creating your current reality, and they've never had an example of what something else can be, what sustainability can be, what growing in a field can be, what being an entrepreneur can be, what being creative and monetizing that can be. And it may be time for you to take the liberty upon yourself to reparent that inner child within you, because you are now an adult. And you don't have to allow your inner child to subconsciously keep creating this reality of havoc. So it's time to reteach yourself and maybe altering some behaviors that you have in your life that are not beneficial to your present self or what's to come in the future, right? Because your present day actions paint the pictures of tomorrow. They truly do. And your past is what's currently painting the pictures of today. So sometimes we have to go back in order to move forward. So if you see yourself in havoc and not being able to sustain anything, maybe take a deeper look as to why that's the case and figure out what you need to implement into yourself and into your inner child to make sure your tomorrow looks different. I've been able to do it. I know you can do the same. It's not easy, but it is doable, and it is the most rewarding thing. Thank you so much for listening to me, and growing with me. Until next time, y'all have a great week, okay? Bye-bye.